What's up everyone, I'm Ian with N.O.B.S Audio. Today we're going to be taking a look at 3 different IEMs that cost under $100. In fact, all of them cost under 60 bucks. I thought it would be really interesting to compare some of the chi-fi offerings that are out there. Now that's not actually a derogatory term, it just really sounds like it should be. Chinese-made audio products have recently been on the scene and really impressing a lot of reviewers. You can get some pretty impressive stuff for impressively low prices, and I really wanted to dig into some of them and see just how much you could get for your money with some of these options. All of these are some popular pairs of IEMs that I saw a lot of people talking about that had a lot of interest and generally some pretty good reviews. So I wanted to get my own impressions of them and relay that back to you. The first pair that we're going to be talking about today are the KZ ZSN. These go for a remarkably low price of about $25. Now, the more popular alternative of these is the KZ ZSN Pro. I personally don't really like a V-shaped sound profile, so I wanted to try the ZSNs instead. In case you were wondering if all the names on this list are going to be awful and hard to remember, they are, and everything's going to be linked in the description. It's not a sponsored video, it's just really difficult to find these things. I'm going to be spending the majority of the time here talking about the actual audio quality and a little bit of build quality in order to rank these different IEMs. I'm not super interested in things like packaging or extra accessories or things like that, but I will say that I tested all of these with my iPhone 12 and a ugreen Lightning to 3.5mm adapter. Technically speaking, this is a DAC, but I didn't really get it for sound quality or anything else. It's just because, you know, Apple. All right, first up on the list is our KZ ZSN IEM. Now, just to kick things off, I want to say these are built really nice. I mean, you could certainly convince somebody who's not familiar with IEMs that these cost maybe 60 or 80 bucks. And that's kind of a general trend you'll see with a lot of these products. None of them are really built like crap, to be honest. Before we get too far into this, I do want to make a big note about these. They have one feature that makes them an absolute deal breaker. These are so sensitive that I had buzzing and hiss issues in a lot of different devices that I tried in. They did sound just fine with my iPhone and a Lightning to 3.5mm adapter. I didn't have really any issues with that. But on a few other devices like laptops and my desktop computer, I did have a persistent kind of sound in the background, which is a pretty big deal breaker for a lot of people. Don't ask me if these are going to hiss or make weird sounds in your phone or laptop or whatever, because I just don't know. Generally speaking, if you want to guarantee a really clean listening experience that's not going to have those issues, you're going to have to buy an expensive DAC or headphone amp that's going to resolve that problem. Aside from that, it's pretty much just luck at the draw. Now, if you're willing to roll the dice on these, I mean, it's only 25 bucks and it may be worth it still. What you can expect in terms of sound profile, these are a little bit bass heavy. It's kind of done maturely, so not everything else is totally overshadowed by the bass, but there is a nice presentation and they feel pretty bassy, especially for something that is this small and this cheap. Generally speaking, I listen to tons of different kinds of music, pretty much every genre, really good recordings, really bad recordings, stuff that people made in their backyard with an iPhone, and I like to just experience what different audio equipment sounds good with different types of music and content. For me, these struggled the most with some very vocal heavy tracks. Certain artists like Shaky Graves and Hozier, and also things like jazz. Essentially stuff that was more vocal heavy or any sort of performance that contained a lot of different members, things like cymbal hits, things like horns and some more high-pitched instruments are definitely more recessed and rolled off here. But if you like to listen to things like hip-hop and EDM and other bass-heavy music, you're probably not going to have any major complaints with these, and you'll probably be happy with these for quite a while until you want to move on to something better. The only other real criticism I have with these is that the ear tips that they come with are not super comfortable. None of them were actively uncomfortable, but you can tell that one of the places they cut cost was by using, I don't know if it's a rubber or just a cheaper silicone, but they're not quite as soft and comfortable as some other things that I've used. It's a pretty easy upgrade if you want to, but it's also something to consider given that these are only 25 bucks and you might end up spending 10 bucks on a new set of ear tips. All right, next up we have the BLON BL Max. BLON or BLON is very well known for the BL03, and to my understanding, it's a pretty well balanced and very good value IEM. But I wanted to check out something else from the lineup, and these are the BL Max. What I immediately noticed when I took these out of the box is they have a certain resemblance to a new Apple product, which is kind of neat. I think they look sort of cool. And they certainly feel like they're very well made. It's a nice metal that builds the entire IEM. I'll also say that when it comes to the ear tips, there is one more size available, and they do feel a little bit softer and more comfortable than the KZs. In terms of value for your money, the cable feels a little bit nicer, and these also feel like they're going to be totally solid. I could definitely foresee this kind of aluminum finish getting damaged over time, so if you're concerned about that, then maybe go to the silver. Aside from that, these do have more of a V-shaped sound profile. I'm gonna be completely honest, these are the least favorite IEMs I tested, not just for the price, just in general. They have a really weird boost in the sub bass, and the way that it works is things like bass guitar even, or maybe some low synth notes, sound quiet, but really, really low notes like you might find maybe in movies or on bass drums and things like that are very pronounced. It's a very odd choice to boost sound in this way. Ultimately, you end up with a sound profile that sounds very inconsistent. Vocals sound very veiled, and I'm talking, if the KZs sounded a little bit veiled, these sound like throwing a big blanket over your head at an Adele concert in terms of veiled. Not even close. I straight up prefer the KZs for anything that is more vocal focused. I had to really try and appreciate these and find what might sound good on them. And I had to whip out my high school playlists to find stuff that sounded remotely pleasing on these. Stuff like a lot of EDM, really low bass stuff, but even that was not all that great. The only thing that I think these really excelled at were things like movies. Because they have a strong reproduction of that sub bass, things like explosions or sweeping sounds did have a better presentation. The other good thing I can say is that they do have probably the best imaging out of the bunch. And that just means how spatial the sound is. You can hear more sweeps and in-between sounds, which is generally a big downfall of all IEMs. It's just very difficult to accomplish. But overall, I don't really want to talk about these much more. I don't think that they're very well tuned. I don't think they're a great value. These cost 35 bucks, and at that price, I mean, I would just rather get the KZs and maybe some better ear tips. But I try not to be a dramatic reviewer, but these were just really, really underwhelming. The last thing I can say in their favor is that they do come with a little bag, which is where they spent most of their time while I owned them, because I just don't really like listening to them all that much. Last up on our list, we have the TinT2 Plus. Now, I gotta talk about the naming scheme on Tin Hi-Fi's IEMs because it's extremely confusing and I don't want you to buy the wrong pair. Again, everything's linked in the description, but just a brief overview. Tin Hi-Fi makes the TinT2, which was a very well-received pair of IEMs that went for about 50 bucks. A lot of people loved them. They were really solid. They also made the TinT2 Pro. They were called the Pro not because they were objectively better, but because the term Pro is now the marketing equivalent of using ketchup on food, and that's just what they decided to call them. Finally, we have the TinT2 Plus, which are a completely different pair of IEMs with a completely different body, different tuning, and generally regarded as better than the previous version. I actually had a pair of TinT2s before. I really liked them, but they were a little bit light on bass. I lost them when they fell out of my backpack when I was going for a long motorcycle ride. None of that really matters when we're looking at this pair of IEMs. Again, link in the description if you want to buy any of these. These are the darling of the group. I know that they're the most expensive, but it feels like a huge leap forward in terms of quality. If I was to show these to someone that was a musician or just somebody that wasn't as familiar with hi-fi audio or hi-fi IEMs, I think that they would really overestimate the price. I mean, the build quality in these is solid. It's a nice metal all around. They fit in your ears well. The cable feels really good. The only nitpick I have, because I did experience it with the original TinT2s, the 3.5mm connection here is actually so beefy that it doesn't really matter because the plug that actually goes into your phone or another audio device is still susceptible to snap. So if you're going to talk about reliability and something that's going to last for a long time, this is definitely something I'd keep a lookout for. All that happened was I sat down in a weird way and it snapped this cable. Again, these are all replaceable, but if I were to nitpick, that's what it would be. The other big plus that these have going for them is that they come with the most number of ear tips. They're the most comfortable. They also come with a pair of foam tips that are extremely comfortable. Foam tips are kind of a controversial topic when it comes to IEMs. They can be a little bit more fussy. You do have to clean them, all that sort of stuff, but if you like them, they come in the box. I opted for the silicone tips because that's generally what I use, and also foam tips can arguably change the sound a little bit, so I wanted to keep things a little bit more leveled if possible. Overall, these are a very flat pair of IEMs. They have a very leveled frequency response, and honestly, I couldn't find anything that didn't sound good on these. The only kind of people that might not like these are people that really like a lot of bass in their music. But even with that, because they're pretty leveled out, stuff like EDM, things like Doing It Right by Daft Punk, or even Legendary by Deadmau5, which is one of the torture test bass songs I use for different audio equipment, sounded really good. I mean, it produces all of the low frequencies. It's just not super overpronounced like you might be used to with some other kind of popular and commercially available audio equipment. Everything from vocal heavy performances like Tyler Childers, Hozier, Shaky Graves, all sounded fantastic on these. Adele and Sia sounded really good. I mean, you can listen to any genre on these. You're never gonna feel like you're missing too much. I think that these are an absolutely amazing value for the price. I've heard a few other respected reviewers talking about how these can compete with much more expensive IEMs, which is pretty much the best thing that you can hear at any price bracket. The only other critique that I could bring up about these is that because of their full metal construction, they can be a little bit heavy in your ears. They might be a little bit less comfortable than some other options. Now, you could fix that with some different ear tips, something like a foam, or something that sticks in your ear a little bit better, but it's only fair to point out they are a heavier IEM, and that's probably the only bad thing I can say about them. If you want to find out a little bit more about why you might want to buy IEMs over headphones, or why you might want to get bookshelf speakers, I'll be making a different video on that in the future. And again, if any of the stuff about different frequency response ranges, things like V-shaped or bass heavy or flat, if that didn't make sense to you, I do have another video on that. With all that said, this has been N.O.B.S Audio, and I will see you soon.